Was Crimea really untouchable, or did one winter night just prove the opposite? In the early hours of December 18th, a sudden wave of explosions tore through the darkness over Sevastopol, shattering the long-standing Russian claim that Crimea remained a hardened fortress beyond Ukraine's reach. For viewers watching this war unfold, the immediate question is unavoidable: if one of the most heavily defended airbases in occupied territory can be struck this deeply, what does that mean for Russia's wider war posture? The strike focused on the Belbek military airfield, a linchpin of Russia's air and air defense architecture in Crimea. According to Ukrainian security officials, long-range drones operated by a special operations unit penetrated layered defenses and hit multiple high-value targets in a single coordinated operation. Fires burned through the night, and by morning, satellite imagery and local footage suggested extensive damage to aircraft shelters, radar positions, and air defense components. Moscow's regional authorities spoke vaguely of repelled attacks, yet the scale of destruction told a different story, one that rippled far beyond the perimeter fence of Belbek. At the center of the damage was equipment. Russia relies on not only to defend Crimea, but also to project power across southern Ukraine and the Black Sea. Fighter aircraft stationed at Belbek provide aerial cover for naval operations, escort missile launches, and extend radar and interception coverage deep into contested airspace. When those assets are compromised, the impact is not merely tactical, it is strategic and economic. Western defense analysts estimate that a single night of losses at Belbek could represent hundreds of millions of dollars in destroyed or degraded systems costs that compound at a moment when Russia is already under strain from sanctions, battlefield attrition, and rising defense expenditures. The timing also mattered. The strike came amid an intensified Ukrainian campaign targeting Russian military infrastructure linked to air and missile attacks on Ukrainian cities. In recent months, Ukraine has increasingly prioritized systems that enable Russia's long-range strikes, airfields, radar networks, and logistics hubs, rather than frontline trench positions alone. This approach reflects a broader shift toward degrading Russia's ability to sustain pressure over time, rather than simply absorbing it. From a NATO perspective, the operation underscored how relatively low-cost unmanned systems can neutralize some of the most expensive elements of a traditional air defense network. Politically, the message was just as sharp. With Donald Trump back in the White House and openly questioning the long-term balance of the war, Kyiv's leadership has strong incentives to demonstrate operational effectiveness and strategic clarity. A successful strike in Crimea sends a signal not only to Moscow, but also to Western capitals Ukraine retains initiative, innovation, and reach. It also quietly reinforces NATO's long-standing assessment that fixed military infrastructure, even when heavily defended, is increasingly vulnerable in modern warfare. Russia's silence at the national level spoke volumes. Acknowledging the strike would mean admitting that a core pillar of its Crimean defense has been compromised, an admission that clashes with years of domestic messaging portraying the peninsula as secure and normalized. For now, the Kremlin appears content to let the night fade into ambiguity, even as the strategic consequences continue to unfold. Yet, this was only the opening chapter. To understand why this strike truly matters, it is necessary to look closely at what was hit and why the loss of a single aircraft at Belbek carries outsized meaning for Russia's air power doctrine. How can the loss of a single aircraft send shockwaves through an entire military doctrine? Among the debris left smoldering at Belbek, one target stood out above all others: a MiG-31 interceptor, long advertised by Moscow as one of the cornerstones of its aerial defense and deterrence posture. For audiences following the war closely, the natural question emerges immediately. Why would Ukraine risk a deep strike into Crimea for one aircraft, and why does its destruction matter so much? The MiG-31 is not an ordinary fighter. Designed during the Cold War to defend vast Soviet airspace, it remains one of the few platforms in Russia's inventory capable of high-speed, high-altitude interception across enormous distances. Stationed at Belbek, the aircraft played a dual role, shielding Crimea from incoming drones and missiles, and enabling Russia to threaten Ukrainian airspace with rapid response sorties. In strategic terms, it functioned as both shield and sword. Losing it, therefore, was not simply a reduction in numbers, it was a dent in Russia's confidence. Ukrainian officials claimed the aircraft was fully combat-loaded at the time of the strike, potentially preparing for a mission against Ukrainian territory. Some Western analysts urged caution, noting that visual confirmation of mounted weapons remains limited. Yet even skeptics agree on one point: whether armed or not, a confirmed MiG-31 loss inside Crimea is rare and symbolically powerful. Russia's operational fleet of these aircraft is finite, aging, and expensive to maintain. Replacing one is not a matter of weeks or even months. It is a long-term industrial challenge under wartime sanctions. From a cost perspective, the damage is stark. Estimates place the value of a MiG-31 at tens of millions of dollars, before factoring in associated munitions, maintenance infrastructure, and trained crews. In a conflict increasingly defined by economic endurance, these losses accumulate quietly but relentlessly. Western defense economists have noted that Ukraine's strategy of targeting high-value assets forces Russia into a costly asymmetry, defending expensive platforms against relatively cheap drones. Each successful strike widens that imbalance. The psychological impact may be even greater. The MiG-31 has been repeatedly highlighted in Russian media as a symbol of technological resilience and reach, particularly in narratives aimed at domestic audiences. Its destruction undercuts those claims, especially when it occurs far from the front line in territory Moscow insists is fully secure. For Russian pilots and air defense crews, the message is unsettling. Even elite platforms are vulnerable when the supporting network fails. For NATO observers, the episode reinforces long-standing concerns about the survivability of legacy air power in a drone-saturated battle space. Analysts have pointed out that without uninterrupted radar coverage and layered defenses, speed and altitude alone offer diminishing protection. This lesson resonates beyond Ukraine, influencing Western air defense planning and investment priorities. Politically, the strike also intersects with broader Western debates. As the Trump administration reassesses U.S. involvement and burden sharing within NATO, Kyiv's ability to independently degrade high-end Russian capabilities strengthens its case for continued support. It demonstrates that assistance already provided, training, intelligence sharing, and technological adaptation, is yielding tangible results. But the MiG-31 did not fall in isolation. Its vulnerability was exposed because something else failed first. To understand that chain reaction, attention must shift from the aircraft itself to the invisible systems that were supposed to protect it, the radars that watch the sky. If Russia's most advanced aircraft were blinded on the ground, what happened to the eyes that were supposed to see the attack coming? The answer lies in the quiet destruction of several radar systems at Belbek, losses that may ultimately matter more than any single aircraft. Ukrainian drones reportedly struck multiple long-range and fire control radars, effectively stripping Russia's air defenses of situational awareness at one of the most sensitive points in occupied Crimea. For military analysts, this was the moment the strike transformed from a daring raid into a textbook example of modern suppression of enemy air defenses. Central to this collapse were the Nebo series radar systems, often described by Western experts as the backbone of Russia's wide-area air surveillance. These radars are designed to detect aircraft, missiles, and drones hundreds of kilometers away, feeding data to fighter jets and surface-to-air missile batteries alike. In theory, they give Russia early warning and precious minutes to react. In practice at Belbek, that promise failed. Ukrainian drones either evaded detection, overwhelmed operators, or struck before a coordinated response could be mounted. The economic implications are severe. Each Nebo-class radar represents an investment measured not just in hardware costs, but in years of development, trained personnel, and integration into broader command networks. Western estimates suggest that the destruction of even one such system can degrade an entire sector of airspace coverage. Losing multiple units in a single night compounds that effect dramatically. In simple terms, Russia paid hundreds of millions of dollars for systems that were neutralized by platforms costing a fraction of that amount. Equally damaging was the reported loss of a key radar component associated with the S-400 air defense system. This radar acts as the fire control brain, guiding interceptor missiles toward their targets. Without it, even intact missile launchers become little more than static displays, expensive, immobile, and largely ineffective. NATO analysts have long warned that modern air defenses are only as strong as their sensors, and Belbek appeared to confirm that assessment in real time. The strategic consequences extend far beyond one base. Belbek's radars do not protect only the airfield itself. They contribute to a broader detection network covering Sevastopol, parts of the Black Sea, and southern Ukraine. When that network fractures, gaps appear, gaps that Ukrainian planners can exploit repeatedly. Each gap increases the risk to Russian aircraft, naval vessels, and logistics routes operating under the assumption of radar cover. From a Western perspective, this episode reinforces a sobering lesson about layered defense. High-end systems, when isolated or overwhelmed, can fail catastrophically. This has implications for NATO states watching the conflict closely, particularly those bordering Russia. The balance between mobility, redundancy, and resilience is now under sharper scrutiny than at any point since the Cold War. Yet even with long-range radars disabled, Russia still relied on closer-in defenses as a last line of protection. Those systems were designed to catch what slipped through. What happened to them at Belbek reveals how complete the collapse truly was. If long-range radars failed and fighter jets never left the ground, could Russia's last defensive shield still stop the attack? At Belbek, the answer appeared to be no. The destruction of a Pantsir S-2 air defense system marked the final stage of Ukraine's carefully sequenced strike, exposing how fragile even Russia's close-range protection can be when isolated from the wider network. For analysts tracking the conflict, this moment confirmed that the airfield's defenses did not merely bend, they collapsed in layers. The Pantsir S-2 is designed as a guardian of last resort. Unlike long-range systems that scan hundreds of kilometers, Pantsir is meant to intercept threats that slip through the outer rings: drones, cruise missiles, and low-flying aircraft approaching critical sites. In Russian doctrine, it exists precisely to counter the kind of unmanned systems Ukraine now deploys in large numbers. Its failure, therefore, is especially revealing. When the system was destroyed at Belbek, it suggested not just a successful hit, but a breakdown in coordination, warning, and reaction time. From a financial standpoint, the loss again highlights the asymmetry shaping this war. Each Pantsir S-2 unit represents a multi-million-dollar investment, combining missiles, radar fire control systems, and trained crews. Against it, Ukraine fielded drones that cost orders of magnitude less. Western military economists increasingly describe this imbalance as a cost exchange trap, where the defender bleeds resources faster than the attacker. Over time, such exchanges erode not only hardware inventories, but strategic confidence. Operationally, the Pantsir's destruction meant that Belbek lost its final autonomous sensor, capable of independently detecting incoming threats. Once that system was gone, nothing remained to protect parked aircraft fuel stores or command facilities from follow-on strikes. This explains why Ukraine was able to hit a high-value aircraft after neutralizing the air defenses first. The sequence mattered: blind the eyes, silence the brain, remove the shield, then strike the prize. For NATO planners observing from the sidelines, this has immediate relevance. Many alliance members operate layered air defense concepts, similar in structure if not in equipment. The Belbek strike reinforces the need for redundancy, dispersal, and rapid repair capabilities. It also underscores how quickly static defenses can be overwhelmed when attackers control the tempo and direction of engagement. Politically, the event lands at a sensitive moment. With the Trump administration emphasizing cost-benefit calculations in foreign commitments, Ukraine's ability to dismantle expensive Russian systems using relatively limited resources strengthens arguments that support has tangible strategic payoff. It also raises uncomfortable questions for Moscow about how long it can sustain losses of high-end equipment while maintaining a credible deterrent posture. The fall of Belbek's close-range defenses did more than clear the way for one night's attack. It altered the risk calculus for future operations across Crimea and the Black Sea region. When the last shield fails, the space it once protected becomes an invitation rather than a barrier. That reality now extends far beyond a single airfield. What happens when one shattered airfield sends tremors across an entire theater of war? The impact of the Belbek strike did not stop at the perimeter of the base. Instead, It rippled outward across Crimea, the Black Sea, and Russia's broader war effort, reshaping calculations on logistics, economics, and strategic reach. By degrading Belbek's defenses, Ukraine did more than score a tactical victory. It exposed a vulnerability at the heart of Russia's southern military posture. Belbek is not just another airfield. It plays a critical role in shielding Sevastopol, home to Russia's Black Sea Fleet, and in extending air cover over key maritime routes. When radar coverage collapses in this area, the consequences are immediate. Russian naval assets operating in the Black Sea face higher risks from unmanned surface and aerial systems, while aircraft sorties must contend with reduced early warning and increased exposure. Western naval analysts note that even temporary gaps in radar coverage can force changes in patrol patterns, delay operations, and reduce overall tempo costs that accumulate quietly but steadily. Economically, the strike added pressure to a defense budget already stretched by prolonged conflict. Replacing destroyed radars, repairing damaged infrastructure, and redeploying air defense assets from other regions all require time and money. Each redeployment creates vulnerabilities elsewhere, forcing Moscow into difficult trade-offs. Defense analysts in Europe have pointed out that this redistribution effect is often the hidden objective of Ukrainian strikes: compel Russia to defend everywhere at once, knowing it cannot do so indefinitely. The broader strategic context also matters. Ukraine has increasingly targeted systems that enable Russia's long-range missile and glide bomb attacks on Ukrainian cities. By degrading airfields like Belbek, Kyiv reduces Russia's capacity to launch and support these strikes, even if only incrementally. In recent months, Western intelligence assessments have highlighted how sustained pressure on launch platforms can reduce sortie rates and strain maintenance cycles. Every aircraft grounded, every radar destroyed, translates into fewer weapons reaching Ukrainian airspace. For NATO, the implications are sobering and instructive. The Belbek strike illustrates how modern warfare blurs the line between frontline and rear areas. Static infrastructure once considered secure is now part of the battle space. This lesson resonates strongly with alliance members bordering Russia, reinforcing investments in mobility dispersion and integrated air and missile defense. Politically, the timing again intersects with Washington's evolving stance. As President Trump weighs future U.S. commitments, Ukraine's ability to impose disproportionate costs on Russia strengthens arguments that continued support yields strategic dividends. It demonstrates that Russia's grip on occupied Crimea is neither absolute nor cheap, and that pressure can be applied without direct NATO involvement. Yet, perhaps the most significant consequence lies ahead. By exposing Belbek, Ukraine has shown that Crimea's defenses are not impenetrable. The question now is not whether such strikes can happen again, but how often and how much more Russia is willing to pay to prevent them. That uncertainty is precisely what Kyiv aims to cultivate. If Crimea can no longer be defended at acceptable cost, does it become Russia's greatest liability? That question now hangs over Moscow as the smoke from Belbek fades and the strategic meaning of the strike settles in. Ukraine's operation was not an isolated act of retaliation, but part of a longer campaign aimed at turning Crimea from a symbol of Russian power into a sinkhole of military resources. Each successful strike tightens that logic, forcing the Kremlin to choose between escalation, redeployment, or quiet acceptance of growing vulnerability. For years, Crimea has served as Russia's forward operating base in the south, a launchpad for airstrikes, a shield for naval operations, and a political trophy presented to domestic audiences as irreversible. But modern warfare is eroding that narrative. Western analysts increasingly describe Crimea as a fixed asset problem, a territory that requires immense resources to defend, yet offers diminishing strategic returns under constant attack. The Belbek strike reinforced this assessment by showing how quickly layered defenses can unravel once pressure is applied intelligently. The economic strain is cumulative. Every destroyed radar interceptor and aircraft must either be replaced or written off. Under sanctions and wartime conditions, replacement is slow, expensive, and uneven. Meanwhile, Ukraine's use of relatively low-cost drones continues to impose a punishing cost-exchange ratio. NATO defense economists point out that such dynamics favor the attacker over time, particularly when the defender relies on centralized high-value infrastructure. Strategically, the implications extend beyond Ukraine. NATO planners view Crimea as a test case for future conflicts, where precision strikes and unmanned systems challenge traditional assumptions about territorial control. The lessons from Belbek are already feeding into Western debates about air defense resilience force dispersal and the vulnerability of rear area bases. Politically, the pressure is mounting as well. With President Trump emphasizing pragmatic assessments of war outcomes, the ability of Ukraine to steadily degrade Russian capabilities strengthens Kyiv's argument that time does not inherently favor Moscow. Instead, prolonged conflict may be exposing Russia's structural weaknesses rather than Ukraine's exhaustion. The Kremlin's public silence following the strike suggests an uncomfortable truth, acknowledging vulnerability risks, undermining years of messaging about Crimea's security. Yet denial does not stop drones, nor does it restore destroyed systems. As Ukraine continues to probe, adapt, and strike, the cost of holding Crimea may continue to rise financially, militarily, and psychologically. What began as one night of explosions at Belbek now points toward a broader strategic reckoning. The peninsula, once presented as untouchable, is increasingly contested not by massed armies, but by persistence, precision, and economic pressure. Whether Russia can absorb that reality, or whether it will be forced to rethink its posture entirely, remains one of the most consequential questions of the war. Ukraine's strike on Belbek airfield marked more than a successful raid. It exposed a cascading failure in Russia's Crimean defenses. In a single night, high-value assets were destroyed, including a MiG-31 interceptor long-range surveillance radars and close-range air defense systems. Together, these losses revealed how dependent Russia's military posture in Crimea is on expensive centralized infrastructure that can be neutralized by far cheaper unmanned systems. Strategically, the attack weakened Russia's ability to protect Sevastopol, support Black Sea operations, and sustain airstrikes against Ukraine. Economically, it deepened a cost-exchange imbalance that increasingly favors Kyiv. Politically, it sent a message to Moscow and to Western capitals that Crimea is no longer a secure rear area, but an active, vulnerable battlefield. Looking ahead, the key question is whether Russia can continue to absorb these losses without fundamentally rethinking its hold on the peninsula. As Ukraine refines its approach and NATO studies the lessons, Crimea may shift from a symbol of strength to a long-term strategic burden for Moscow. So what comes next? Will Ukraine intensify this pressure, or will Russia find a way to restore deterrence in Crimea?